On June 29, 2015, a woman in Routt County, Colorado was working her usual shift at the local post office when she was approached by two people at the counter. She recognized both of them, a man and a woman, as nearby residents, making polite small talk with them as they picked up their mail. While there was absolutely nothing out of the ordinary about this exchange at the time, that would change just one day later, when this same postal employee walked back into work and noticed that morning's headline in the local paper. As soon as she saw it, she knew that she needed to call the police. Not only had something awful happened, she might now be one of the only people who could help make sense of what had actually taken place.
Routt County 911, where's your emergency?
I just got home. I'm missing a bunch of guns, and I think my son's fiancé is dead in the bed.
Okay. Is she breathing?
I touched her and she didn't move. She's face down, tied up, her hands behind her back.
Okay, can you check if she's breathing for me?
Yeah, she's stiff.
She's stiff?
Yeah.
The 911 call you just heard was placed at 7:11 p.m. on June 29, 2015. It was made by a man named Russell West, who told dispatchers he had just made an extremely disturbing discovery inside of his own home. It had happened when he walked into a bedroom belonging to his 24-year-old son, Keith. After flicking on the lights, he had found Keith's 23-year-old fiancé, Patricia Richmond, completely unresponsive. Tragically, she was dead. What was worse, it was clear that this was no accident. Detectives raced to the West home, a rural property in the community of Clark, about 20 miles north of the city of Steamboat Springs. By the time they arrived, responding officers had already sealed off the perimeter with crime scene tape, and they began by taking brief statements from Russell West, as well as his wife Amy, who was also home at the time of the awful discovery. They explained that Patricia, who went by Trish or Trisha, was engaged to their son Keith. The young couple had lived with them for the last 5 or 6 years since finishing high school. Heartbreakingly, they had been in the middle of planning their wedding, which was only supposed to be a few months away. Detectives were just finishing up their brief conversation with Russell and Amy West when Keith arrived home as well. He was extremely distraught and was unable to give a statement, so with that, investigators continued on into the house. What was waiting for them inside was truly the stuff of nightmares. Trish Richmond was lying face down on the bed in Keith's room. Her body was over to one side, with her legs partially dangling off towards the floor. Disturbingly, her hands had been zip-tied behind her back, and there was a belt between her feet on the carpet below. The belt was looped through the buckle as though it had been used as a secondary restraint, or possibly, as detectives speculated, a ligature. This theory would gain further credibility when they noticed marks on the 23-year-old's neck that appeared to be consistent with strangulation. The next thing to catch the attention of investigators was the state of the bedroom itself. The place was a complete mess, with items having been pulled out and scattered everywhere on the bed and floor. This could have meant that the crime was a random burglary gone wrong. However, detectives quickly found reasons to doubt this. For starters, the property itself was fairly remote, making it an unlikely target for an opportunistic thief. There were also no signs of forced entry anywhere at the home, something that authorities would have expected to find since the place was supposedly locked up prior to the discovery of the body. Finally, though the crime scene was a mess, the items that had been pulled out weren't actually all that random. A lot of the boxes and packaging found littered about had actually contained firearms and ammunition, something that Russell West had mentioned during the 911 call. In fact, further investigation would reveal that other than some money, weapons were the main things that were stolen, and whoever had taken them appeared to have known more or less where to look. To detectives, all of this suggested that whoever had committed the murder was likely quite familiar with the house, and by extension, possibly the victim as well. The question remained, though, who would want to kill Trish, and why? Was murder the primary motive? Was this about the stolen guns? Or was the true reason for the heinous crime something else entirely? Investigators had no idea, but they knew there was one obvious place to start finding the answers they were looking for. After doing a preliminary analysis of the crime scene, detectives with the Routt County Sheriff's Office began to focus on collecting more information about Trish Richmond. They reached out to the 23-year-old's family and friends, hoping to learn as much as they could about the circumstances leading up to the murder. When police spoke to Trish's friends and family, they were understandably devastated. By now, many of them, especially those that lived in the local area, knew that something bad had happened. However, they hadn't been sure exactly what. Trish's mother, Denise, and her sister, Misty, were especially frantic. They lived on the other side of the country in Ohio and had been desperately trying to contact Keith, but received no answer. After being filled in about the heartbreaking crime, the 23-year-old's loved ones did what they could to provide as many details possible about her life. Trish was originally from Ohio, but had moved to the Steamboat Springs area with her family when she was in the 7th grade. She had quickly fallen in love with the small mountain city, with her and her younger sister Misty spending a lot of their adolescent years riding horses and enjoying the picturesque scenery and wildlife. In 2011, Trish and Misty's parents had separated, and Misty had returned to Ohio with their mother. Trish, however, decided to stay in Colorado. She had friends, she was settled in school, and she felt that her place was now there. Friends described Trish as a beautiful woman with an amazing smile and a great sense of humor. She was a creative soul and a talented artist, one who spent countless hours filling sketchbooks with her impressive drawings and designs. Despite her kind heart, those close to the 23-year-old said she hadn't always had the best luck with romantic relationships. Still, she always tried to maintain a positive outlook and acknowledged her own shortcomings, taking the good and the bad that life had to offer. Friends said that was the meaning behind the tattoo on her chest that read, "Beautiful Mess." It was her motto. She always used to say to them, "You might be a mess right now, but you're a beautiful mess." All that being said, according to the friends, since her engagement, it looked like Trish had found happiness with Keith. For the past few months, she had been planning their wedding and had been excitedly talking about it to anyone who would listen. At the same time that these conversations were happening, other members of the investigative team were sitting down with all 3 members of the West family. In separate interview rooms, they asked them to explain their version of what had happened the evening of the murder. They started with Russell and Amy, since they were the ones who were actually home at the time that Trish's body was found. Amy said that the first sign that something wasn't right happened almost immediately after she got home. The dogs weren't where they were supposed to be, and the kitchen door was wide open. Initially, Amy's first instinct wasn't to be afraid. Instead, she was kind of annoyed. Trish would have been the only one home during that time of day, and she knew she wasn't supposed to leave the door like that. Anytime it was open during the summer, it made the rest of the house uncomfortably hot. Amy started to feel more uneasy, though, when she walked around the house a bit and couldn't find Trish anywhere. She called out a couple of times, but didn't get an answer. Finally, Amy went over to the bedroom where Trish and Keith slept. However, she said she stopped short of turning on the lights. Even without them on, though, she said she could tell the room looked disheveled. By this time, Russell had come home, so Amy had asked him to investigate further.
So I got home before Russ, but not by very much, and I noticed all the dogs were at the sliding door at the garage. The kitchen door was open, and I went, Trish knows to close that door. It always makes it so hot in the rest of the house then if you leave that door open.
Russell gave a very similar statement to Amy. He said that as soon as he walked in the door that evening, his wife started asking him about items that were missing around the house, and saying that she couldn't find Trish. Russell said that the first thing he noticed was that Trish and Keith's puppy, Barley, was gone. He thought maybe Trish had taken the dog for a walk, but then he noticed her phone and wallet were both lying out in strange places. Her wallet was open on a counter over near the coffee machine, and her phone was in the garage. Finally, he went into Keith and Trish's bedroom. And that's when he saw it. The 23-year-old's feet dangling over the side of the bed. He called 911, and after confirming that Trish was dead, started to notice that other things were missing, particularly several guns belonging to him and his son.
I get home, Amy goes, the dog food's gone, you know where the dog food is? No. And then she goes, Trish isn't around here either, and their little puppy called Barley. But then yet, her phone was in the garage, and her wallet was open by the coffee machine. And that's when I noticed her feet sticking over the bed. So I yelled her name again. No answer. And then I looked over, and there she was, face down. She was, cold, and that's when I dialed 911.
Okay.
After that, I noticed he's got some guns missing. An XD-45, a Browning high power, and my 44, and the other gun, 9mm.
After establishing the details directly involving the discovery of the crime, detectives zoomed out a bit and asked the West family about their activities that day. Russell and Amy stated that they had both been working at the auto shop that they owned. They said that they had been there pretty much all day, with the exception of a short window of time just before 1 p.m., when Amy had run out to do some errands.
Did you see her this morning?
I didn't see her this morning. I saw her last night.
You went to work, and where do you work at?
I have my own business. I don't get out of there to leave the shop or anything like that. I'm kind of stuck there.
Okay. And did you have any communication throughout the day with her?
No, I didn't talk to her at all.
Do you know where Amy was today?
She was at work with me.
She was at your shop.
Yeah, we worked together there.
Did she ever leave today?
Yeah, she went and did a bank run and
What time?
came back. 1 o'clock, somewhere
How long
in
was she
there.
gone?
I'd say she's gone for about, 35, 40 minutes.
I went to the bank at probably 12:45 maybe. And before that time, I had made a phone call. I thought it was on my cell phone, but I can't seem to find that time.
Keith told detectives that he had also been at work all day. He said that he left quite early that morning, like he always did, and hadn't returned until that evening. He raced home after he was told about Trish's murder by his dad over the phone.
Kind of walk me through the day.
I wake up at about 4 to 4:30.
Okay.
Get ready to go to work at the mine.
So you got off work about 6:30-ish, you said?
Somewhere around there.
Okay.
Driving home. And then that's when my father called me.
Now, part of the reason that investigators were interested in all of the West's whereabouts prior to the murder simply had to do with establishing the basic facts of the case. However, that wasn't the only reason. As the interviews dragged on into the early morning hours, they were also now trying to explore a theory. You see, when detectives continued to speak with Trish's friends and family, they began to hear that her situation with her fiancé and future in-laws might not be as rosy as they were initially led to believe. In particular, Misty claimed that Trish and Keith had problems in their relationship, and Trish was also feeling a lot of pressure from Keith's family to settle down and start a family of their own. Misty stated that, in particular, there had been tension between her sister and Keith's mom. Trish said Amy was always trying to keep tabs on her and constantly wanted to know where she was going, what she was doing, and who she was doing it with. This became even more interesting to detectives when they learned that a while back, Trish and Keith's relationship had almost ended for good. They had broken up, and during that time, Trish had started seeing someone else. Eventually, they had gotten back together and appeared to patch things up, but several people told authorities that Keith had been really angry about the situation. After hearing all of this, detectives were definitely seeing some red flags. Based on the details of the crime scene, they already suspected that the killer was someone familiar with the West home. They now wondered, Was it possible that one or more members of the family were involved? Maybe something had happened and they had staged the scene to look like a burglary afterwards. To follow up on this, investigators started to ask the Wests more pointed questions about Trish and Keith's relationship. Did they argue a lot? Did things ever get physical? All of them categorically denied that anything like that was going on.
How would you describe Keith and Trish's relationship?
They argued just like any couple would.
I know couples argue and stuff like that. Have you ever seen any of that?
Not really.
Okay.
I've heard them argue before, and then
Nothing.
5 minutes later, everything's all good again.
Have you ever seen anything kind of get past that arguing on either side?
No, never.
Tell me about your last argument.
Last night, she was getting after me about me not helping her enough with the invites because we were supposed to send them out 2 weeks ago.
You guys ever get physical when you have arguments?
Investigators, however, weren't so sure, especially after they noticed scratch marks on one of Amy's arms, as well as what looked like a small amount of blood on Keith's hands.
Last couple of questions for you, and we have to do this, okay?
Okay.
You have some scratches on your arm.
I do.
Is there any reason any of your DNA will be found on Trish?
I didn't touch her this morning. I didn't hug her. You know, it's probably in that room. I opened the door, I turned on the light. I didn't touch anything on the bed.
Considering what they already knew about the window of time when Amy's movements couldn't be accounted for that day, investigators started to speculate. Maybe Keith got into an argument with Trish, one that had escalated and turned deadly. After that, perhaps Amy had helped him to cover up what had happened. When asked, Amy and Keith each offered explanations for their apparent injuries. Keith said that he had probably been bitten by a mosquito, while Amy said her scratches had happened when she was asked by police to remove her dogs from the house when they first arrived at the crime scene. Amy and Keith also both agreed to provide DNA samples.
I have a little puppy. She's got sharp claws and she's blind and she's got brain damage. So I was trying to pick her up and she was fighting and scratching and whatever.
Did you kill Trish?
No, I didn't.
Did you have anything to do with her demise?
I don't.
Do you know any information that you've not shared with us?
No.
Have you been 100% truthful with us?
Yes.
What is that? Is that blood?
Yeah, probably from mosquito bite or something.
Any reason that would be Patricia's blood? Is there any reason why your DNA is going to be on her?
I kiss her every morning.
It's just a matter of taking a Q-tip, making it wet. Okay.
Obviously, my DNA is going to be all over that room because it's mine.
Well, sure.
While detectives still weren't sure what to think of what Amy and Keith had told them, after collecting the DNA samples and sending them off for analysis, they knew that they also needed to spend some time considering alternative suspects. They asked the Wests if there was anyone else who might have had access to the house, or just anyone generally who they could think of that might want to hurt Trish. Keith said that in terms of access to the house, the only person he could think of was his cousin Cole. He had lived with them for a bit, but that was a while ago. Now Cole was living with his grandparents. Keith stated that he couldn't even remember the last time his cousin had been back over to the house. As for someone who might have wanted to harm Trish, that was a different story. Both Keith and Amy immediately said that there was a name that came to mind: Randall Herman. As soon as detectives heard this name, they were intrigued. From speaking to Trish's friends, they knew that Randall was the man who the 23-year-old had briefly been seeing back when she and Keith had broken up.
There is another person that had been between Keith and Trish. His name is Randall Herman. She was maybe seeing this Randall kid secretly. She's actually had many partners.
Anybody else that comes to mind that would do this? Any name come to mind that you might?
One that comes to mind the most, his name is Randall Herman. And they dated for about a month because we broke up about halfway between our relationship and split up for about 3 months just to work things out.
According to Keith, there was actually a lot more to the story with Randall than what investigators had heard so far. For starters, contrary to what others had said about him being angry, Keith claimed that it was actually Randall who had been upset and jealous. Keith explained that yes, he and Trish had gone through some difficulties, but ultimately, they had patched things up. He said that when Trish decided to move back in with him, Randall had started acting unhinged. He had sent her a bunch of extremely nasty messages and had even made public posts to his Facebook page talking about her and the West family. Keith alleged that in one of these, he had threatened to kill his family's dogs.
He texting her, calling her stupid.
Understandably, this information was quite concerning to investigators. They quickly tracked Randall Herman down, asking him about his relationship with Trish Richmond and his whereabouts on the afternoon of June 29th. Randall admitted that he had been in love with Trish, but said that his actions and feelings had been completely mischaracterized. He said that while he had only known the 23-year-old for a short period of time, he had wanted to be with her forever. He had even asked her to marry him, but things had gotten complicated and she had ended up going back to her ex. He was deeply hurt that anyone thought that he could be responsible for such a heinous crime. Authorities checked the alibi that Randall provided and learned that he had been at work during the murder. Police were further convinced that he had nothing to do with the killing because Randall had never been to the West house and almost certainly wouldn't have been able to get inside without physically breaking in. Around this same time, detectives learned that Keith's alibi had also been confirmed. He was at work, just like he said, and was nowhere near the crime scene when Trish was murdered. At this point, investigators were exhausted. They had been working the case straight through the night, and it now looked like they were back to square one. Luckily for them, they were about to receive a call that would change everything. Around 24 hours into the investigation into Trish Richmond's murder, detectives with the Routt County Sheriff's Office were notified about a potentially crucial new piece of information. It had come from a local postal worker named Megan Kay, who said she believed she had seen something that might help them to solve the case. Megan explained that the previous afternoon, around 2 p.m., she had been at work at the post office attached to the Clark General Store when a young man and woman came in to pick up some mail. They had a brief conversation before going on their way, and initially she thought nothing of it. That was, until she saw today's newspaper and discovered that the woman she had spoken to had been found dead just hours after their interaction. Understandably, this was a potentially huge lead for investigators. If Megan was correct, then she was the last person to see Trish alive before the murder. And whoever had been with her at the post office was now the prime suspect. Unfortunately, Megan didn't know the name of the man Trish had been with, but she was fairly confident she had seen him around before. She provided police with a basic description. He looked like he was a bit younger than Trish and had sandy brown hair. Detectives already had a hunch that they knew who Megan was talking about. However, it was when they received a second lucky break that this suspicion was all but confirmed. A neighbor of the West family said that they had seen a white SUV in the home's driveway on the afternoon of June 29th. They hadn't reported it earlier because it didn't seem suspicious. In fact, they were pretty sure they'd seen the vehicle before. As it happened, detectives were already familiar with this vehicle because Keith had mentioned an almost identical SUV during his interview. It belonged to someone that he had also mentioned, his 21-year-old cousin, Cole Pollard. After confirming the vehicle's registration, investigators contacted Cole's grandparents. They said that they hadn't seen him in several days, and they had no idea where he was. With that, an alert was put out for the 21-year-old and the SUV in Colorado and in surrounding states. The following day, Routt County detectives received word that the white SUV had been found by a Colorado Parks and Wildlife officer. It was parked at a campground roughly a 3.5-hour drive south, near Trappers Lake. In addition to sending local police to the area, the Routt County Sheriff's Office also alerted the SWAT team. Since detectives had reason to believe Cole was in possession of a number of firearms, they needed to be prepared for the possibility that they could be walking into an ambush. When authorities arrived and began searching the perimeter of the lake, they came across a witness who said that they had seen someone matching Cole's description in the area. He was acting strangely and had been seen sitting at a picnic bench at an unoccupied campsite without any kind of gear or supplies. Officers headed towards the place that the witness had described. On the way, they saw Cole walking down the road. He didn't try to put up a fight, and instead allowed himself to be placed under arrest. Eventually, other law enforcement personnel who were aiding in the search found the actual site where Cole had been staying. Keith and Trish's missing puppy, Barley, was unharmed and tied up by a tent there. Inside the tent were almost all of the missing weapons and ammunition that had been taken from the West home. With the evidence rapidly piling up against him, Cole almost immediately broke down and confessed after being taken into custody. Even so, what he had to say still caught detectives off guard and was incredibly disturbing. The 21-year-old stated that on the afternoon of June 29th, he and Trish had been hanging out when suddenly something inside him had just sort of snapped. He said that he felt like he had blacked out, and the next thing he knew, he was attacking her.
Detective Mundt here advised you of your rights, and you waived those rights and agreed to talk to us. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
All right, Cole. So, tell me what's going on. I freaked out at the West House and did something stupid.
You freaked out and did something stupid. What's that?
Choked Trish to death. My cousin's fiancé.
Is that Patricia?
Yes, sir. Just snapped.
And you bound her hands. What'd you bound her hands with?
I think it was a zip tie and a belt. Put my arm around her neck and tried to choke her and lost hold. Then put my hands around her neck. Just stayed there.
Horrifyingly, the murder wasn't the end, though. Unfortunately, there's no easy or tactful way to say this. Once Trish was dead, Cole had sexually violated her corpse.
What else happened?
Do I really have to say that? Had sex with her, too.
Unsatisfied with the reasoning that Cole had given behind the brutal crime, detectives attempted to push him for additional information. He offered vague excuses, saying that he had been going through a tough time and that he felt his life was unraveling, but wouldn't give them much more.
Just been really angry for the past couple weeks.
Over?
Everything started to just go downhill. Wasting money, just making all my family mad, and losing friends, just doing stupid things. It's just been building up, I guess.
Okay.
I've gotten in a few fights in the past couple of weeks, and I don't know, it just keeps getting worse.
After a little more digging, investigators were able to speak with Cole's ex-girlfriend. She said that they had broken up a few days earlier, and that afterwards, Cole had kind of gone off the deep end. This was a little more insight, but again, nothing that seemed to remotely explain his heinous actions. Ultimately, though, it appears that this was the most complete explanation detectives were ever able to get behind the awful tragedy. Understandably, the revelation that Cole was responsible for Trisha's murder came as a huge shock to pretty much everyone. Those who had known the 21-year-old growing up said he seemed like a nice kid from a decent church-going family. Even those closest to him hadn't suspected a thing, including Keith, who tragically stuck up for Cole in his interview with police, saying that he was like a brother to him. Following his arrest, Cole Pollard took a plea deal and in May of 2016 pleaded guilty to second-degree murder as well as an attempted sexual assault charge. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison and 10 years to life respectively, with the sentences set to run consecutively. According to prison records, he will be eligible for parole in 2052. One of the most troubling things to me about this story is just how completely random and senseless it all was. I feel terrible for Trish's family because I can't imagine how you would even begin to cope or process a loss like this, knowing that there isn't any real kind of explanation. I truly applaud their strength because from the sounds of it, they're more resilient than I think I could ever be in a situation like that. In an interview that we came across, Misty stated that it never gets any easier, that you find ways to continue on. Heartbreakingly, she also described getting to see her sister one last time and holding her hand before her remains were cremated. It's an image that I don't think I'll ever be able to get out of my head. Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a second to give a huge shout out to everyone who has made it this far into the video. Seriously, thank you so much for watching. If you found today's upload interesting and informative, we'd be honored if you'd consider liking and subscribing, as well as hitting the notification bell and selecting all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. If you're looking for additional ways to help support the channel, we'd love to have you join us over on Patreon. Patrons get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. You can learn more at patreon.com/crimezone, where you'll also find some of the fine folks whose names are currently on screen. All that being said, we understand that not everyone has the means to support financially, and that's totally okay. We appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much everyone, and take care.